Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ryan Lamar, the host of the Youth Leaders in Wealth Management podcast. Today, I have the pleasure to be joined by Matthew Daugherty, a senior financial advisor and partner at Balanced Wealth Group, and a former Ohio University alumni. So, Matt, thank you so
Correct.
much for coming on, and I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk to you today. So, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to be here, Ryan. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. All the thanks is to you, and I really appreciate you coming on. And I just kind of wanted to open up the conversation with a question: What made you pursue a career in the wealth management industry?
Well, my story is probably different than, well, not a lot of people, but most people. There's a lot of second generation, third generation financial planners coming into the business, but there's really two things for me. The first is that I am a third generation financial planner. My grandfather started in the business in 1950 in Sharon, Pennsylvania. He started out as basically a mutual fund salesman at the time, and so he started the same year my dad was born, which is always a difficult thing to do. He left the Westinghouse Corporation. He had a salaried position, went into a sales position. He had my dad, and he also had, I think my dad is second in line, so he had two kids. He ended up having five kids total. Um, but then he ended up getting moved from Sharon, Pennsylvania to Canton, Ohio to actually start the Akron, Canton, Ohio division of IDS Financial Services at the time. And he ended up bringing my dad into the business in 1978, which ironically is the same year that I was born.
Oh
So
my God.
he started the year my dad was born. My dad started the year I was born. And in 2001, I graduated from, as you said, Ohio University. And I did not have a son at that time. Fortunately, I didn't have my son for many, many years till later. I have a son named Ethan who's 7 now, but I started in the business at that point. So obviously, growing up around it was a very important part of my progression into the career, and it does make it much easier. I mean, I came into a platform at it was Ameriprise Financial at the time. Actually, it was American Express Financial Advisors at the time, where we were basically given a management system. There was people that managed us, and we were given a bunch of leads. And the whole thing was, hey, go out and like make phone calls, knock on doors, get as many clients as you possibly can. Um, and I was able to kind of grow that over the course of time. But when I came to the business, I came into it. I'd watched my grandfather and my dad both have a high level of freedom. They were able to control their own schedules because they were essentially self-employed. They made a good living. So that meant we were able to do most of the things that we wanted to do. And they created I got to see my dad especially create these great relationships with people. Like my dad is the epitome of a relationship guy. He just has I remember actually sometimes getting frustrated about it when I was like starting to come into the business, like, oh my gosh, like all these clients are my dad's friends. And at the time, I thought like that just makes his life that much more difficult. But in reality, that's actually what solidifies those relationships. So I value freedom. I still do. I did then. Seeing that freedom from them was something that made this a very appealing career to me. And seeing the ability to create relationships was a very appealing piece to me. So that's essentially why I got into the business.
Relationships and freedom. I think that those two go hand in hand when deciding a career, and for you to make a decision based on that is completely rational. And in my opinion, like I have the same exact thoughts. Like the freedom that you'd be able to get from, like you said, like a little kind of self-employed, even though you're not, but being able to make your own schedule, given the fact that you're controlling like when the appointments are, when the client meetings are, and having a big bulk of the job being relationship oriented and just having meetings with people, like you said, your dad's friends. But those relationships that he built into friendships, didn't always start like that. And the ability to craft them into real friendships is an art that takes a long time to do. Um, and I think that's one of the best things about this career, and reasons why I went into it, or decided to try to go into it, is because I wanted the opportunity to be able to create relationships and figure out how far I can go on that end of the spectrum.
Well, the better you are at cultivating those relationships, the more successful you're going to be. And if you haven't heard this saying already, you're going to hear it now. And that is that people don't care how much you, do you know what you know what this saying is? People don't care how much you what?
No.
They don't care how much you know until they know how much you
Care.
care. So you have heard it.
Yeah.
Very good. Yes.
Yeah.
And it is absolutely true. People do not care how much you know until they know how much you care. If you do not care about them, if they get the feeling that you don't care about them, they are not going to trust you with their financial lives.
Yeah, I mean that makes a lot of sense. And it's, it's intuitive when you say it, but almost hard to imagine when you're out of it. But like I think that's such an amazing quote to live by, like in the sense of the industry, because if you show that you care first, it's going to help so much on that relationship building trust side. So I appreciate you saying that, and I think that's one of the a really great quote.
Yeah, I mean, especially for a young person, you said the part about it being intuitive. The problem with it being intuitive is that when you are young and you're going to experience this, and as will many of your listeners, when you go into meetings with people, especially people that are 15, 20 years older than you, and they are looking to you to be their financial advisor, it doesn't even matter that you care. There's still that part of you that says, and internally, you're saying to yourself, I need these people to see how much I know. I need them to see that I'm actually worthwhile as a financial advisor. And so you have this, you're going to have this tendency and this inclination to want to talk and to spew out all this stuff about Sharpe ratios and beta and stuff about investments that's just going to completely go over their head and make them think you don't care. That's why you have to turn it around and ask them questions about themselves and learn about them and recognize things in their lives.
So, given that, how important is listening and the ability to, ask reflective probes and engage that type of mindset and interest to the career?
I mean, I don't think there's anything more important in our business than listening and asking the right questions, because if you listen, if you ask the right questions, and if you get the right responses from your clients, they are going to, people will sell themselves. If you ask them the right questions, they will sell themselves on you, on your services, and on what you can do for them. So hands down, listening is far more important than talking. There's another saying, which is God gave you two ears and one mouth for a reason,
Yeah,
right?
that's one of the best ones. I was actually thinking about that yesterday, because everyone has a tendency to want to talk, especially about themselves when they have the opportunity in conversations, in work, in business, whatever it may be. But if you take a step back and think like, well, I do have 2 years for a reason, and you start listening, you can see it. At least personally, I see it in a lot of conversations I have just based on like other people, like it's just human nature to want to be able to talk about yourself, right? So to be able to kind of put that aside is such an important skill as a financial advisor, and really be able to open your ears and be ready to ask questions about the client or whoever is in front of you is so important.
Yeah. And for those of you that are starting out in the career, do something to make it so that you are intentional about asking questions, right? In other words, it's, you're going to be nervous. And when you're nervous, you have this inclination to just talk. You need to do something sometimes that will like prompt you to remember to stop and listen, to ask the next question. Maybe that one of the things that I teach the young guys on our team is FORE, FORE. So just like, if you're playing golf, FORE, you know what FORE is an acronym for?
No.
Family, occupation, recreation, and entertainment. So in other words, you put that, like I have them put that at the top of their agenda or summary or whatever they have that's going with when they're meeting with a client. Just put F.O.R.E. And if you don't have anything you can think of to ask them because you don't have anything in common, ask them about their family. What do they do for a living? What do they like to do recreationally? And what do they do for entertainment? Ask them about those things. You get them talking. You will learn things about them that you can then recognize and incorporate into the conversation.
That's a really, really great acronym that I'm definitely going to steal from you, because I really like that.
You're not
For
stealing it
it.
from me, by the way. I didn't create it. I learned it from somebody else. I can't remember where it came from, but I definitely did not create it myself.
Well, that's definitely a great one. I appreciate you bringing it to our attention here. So, a question I have, given the fact that that Youth Leaders in Wealth Management is largely a career development organization, helping students get into wealth management careers, as they go through college, or maybe even a little bit earlier in high school. Um, what was the Ohio University like, and how did it prepare you for a career in the wealth management industry?
Well, I have to be honest that when I went to OU, I did not go there because they had the best financial planning program. So one of the first pieces of advice I would give to somebody who is in high school that does know that they want to go into financial planning, and understand, when I went to college, I didn't know. I think there was part of me that did know because of the experiences I'd had as a kid. But I think I was also fighting that. Like, I don't really want to do what my dad does, you know?
Yeah.
And so when I went to OU, for me, it was love at first sight. Literally, I remember driving down the exit ramp and looking out over this beautiful campus. There's a river in front of it. I was like, oh my God, I love this place. This is where I'm going to school. And I didn't go right into finance. I started out in management. I went into information systems because that's where the money was. But I quickly learned that I hated computers. Like, I didn't hate computers. I just loved talking to people. I didn't like being in front of a computer all the time. I went into pre-law. I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. Quickly learned I did not want to be a lawyer. So I eventually ended up just kind of yielding to where life was taking me, which was to being a financial advisor. And I studied finance and I studied marketing. Um, so OU at that time was probably not the best school, nor is it, honestly, and I hate to say this, I'm sorry to all those that I served with on the Finance Advisory Council at Ohio University. It is not the best school for financial planning right now. They unfortunately did not have a high demand for it. And so the program has actually kind of gone downhill. But if you are in Ohio, where I'm at, Ohio State has a really great program. It's not actually through the Fisher College of Business, but they have a great financial planning track. The University of Akron has a great track. Mount Vernon University has a great track. Um, and there's other colleges out there that have really good tracks. So my first thing would be to encourage you, if this is what you want to do, if you know it before you're going to college, actually find a college that has a really good program. And then to answer your question directly, Ryan, as far as like how did Ohio University prepare me? Ohio University just prepared me for life. I mean, there were a lot of things that I did learn about finance. There's a lot of things I learned about insurance. There's things I learned about estate planning. I took classes on those things, and I did get a good baseline knowledge. But the reality of it is that nothing is better than experience. And while I was at OU, I did intern not in my dad's office. I interned for an American Express financial advisory practice that was associate, like they shared office space with my dad. And so I worked with them. I got experience. I learned what it was going to be like. Like, that was the most impactful thing. So, one, find a school that is going to help you get where you want to go. And two, definitely get internships with somebody that's doing financial planning work if this is something you think you want to do.
Yeah, so I like how you brought up about Ohio State's like lack of demand when it comes to the financial planning side, because that could be a problem for a lot of universities if it's not like people clawing down the door trying to say, hey, we need a financial planning track. It's going to be a little bit harder for them to justify moving resources to that area, and there's a lot of schools that just don't really offer anything, right? Yeah, that's a big reason why youth leaders exist, is to kind of bridge that gap for the students that don't go to these great universities that have programs that kind of help push them along that path and give them the opportunities and the tools to learn and succeed in the industry. And in my opinion, it's a very underutilized, undermarketed industry compared to the other finance jobs out there right now. There's just more resources for those careers. And I think that wealth management can be an excellent opportunity for a student that's coming out here and looking for a good job that's especially relationship focused. Like you said, you weren't really interested in the information management stuff, being in front of a computer. There's so many people like that, right? That just want to have conversations with people, be able to talk to people, and not necessarily sit behind a computer screen. And that's exactly who I am. I can't sit behind a computer screen 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week. That's just not who I was. And there's so many people like that. And I'm super glad that people like yourself are at least helping push universities in that direction, and being a little vocal, like, hey, that there is demand. You had it, and being a part of that board allows that opinion to be a little bit more heard, which I think is awesome. But I appreciate you sharing your story with Ohio University.
Of course. And I just want to say you made the comment about a lot of students not going towards this as a career right now. Just like when I was in college, people were pushing me to go towards information systems. And the reason for that was because I went to college from 1997 until 2001. And you may be too young to remember this. I'm sure you know it because of what you're studying. But 1994 until 2000 was the tech boom. It
Yep.
was all about technology. So guess where the money was? It was in management information systems. So people were chasing the money. They weren't chasing what they loved. I moved towards what I love. Today, investment banking and financial analysts, basically, that's where the money is. That's what everybody wants. Anybody who's studying finance, they want that, but they don't realize how much freedom they're going to give up in their lives by going down that path.
100%.
You'll get out of college and make a lot of money as an investment banker, and you can make a whole lot of money over the course of your life. But that company that you work for is going to own you.
Yeah, that's a pretty scary thought, right? Um, I had people that when I was networking and trying to figure out what I wanted to do before I was set on financial planning, being like, "Oh, you gotta go into investment banking. You got to do it now. You got to go, hard and
Mm-hmm.
fast." And I
Yeah.
was like, "Oh, okay. Like, let me try this." And then I started doing a little bit more research, and it's like, "Oh, 100-hour weeks, constantly on call for the first few years. Like, say goodbye to your family." And I'm like, "Whoa." Still your role there. I'm not sure if that's what I want, right? And I did want to be pushed in that direction. And I think a lot of kids are just naively chasing the starting
Mm-hmm.
salary.
Yeah.
And
And they
I
don't
think,
realize that like those things like sacrificing your family, 100-hour weeks, that doesn't sound bad. It doesn't sound bad until you're doing it.
yes,
So a lot of
I see
people,
what you're
they're like
saying.
blinded by the income, and they think, oh, it sounds exciting, it sounds fun. It's not. So sorry,
Yeah.
I gotta cut you off.
No, 100% I agree. And I always think that finance-esque movies have kind of skewed the image of what a finance career could be, because it's definitely not as exciting as Wolf of Wall Street. Like, I know there's
No.
a lot of young kids thinking that they go into investment banking and then they'll spend all their time, BSing with their friends at work and whatever they did during Wolf of Wall Street. But obviously, that's not the case anymore, right? And even in these high finance type of jobs, I don't think that it's like that. And I think there's a lot more sacrifice than it appears on the surface, and it seems to be more like an iceberg. Um, and when you get underneath that water level and you see everything that goes with it underneath, it's like obviously every career has a lot of sacrifices that need to be made to be successful. But those are just not the same level of sacrifices that I wanted to make, or at least the same type. And I think that a lot of students would agree with me.
Yeah, I agreed 100%.
So, moving on, I wanted to ask a little bit about the industry. Obviously, it's been a little bit a while since you graduated college. How has the industry shifted from when you started to how it is today?
There's a lot of things that have changed. When I started in the business, one of the sayings that I heard from a guy named Ted Jenkin, who, if you Google Ted Jenkin, you'll see him. He's a talking head out there. He was one of the first leaders I ever had. And he said that to be a successful financial advisor, you have to have the mind of a capitalist, but more
Part of
importantly, you have to have the heart of a social worker. You've heard this too, right?
Yeah, that's a great one.
That's one of my favorite lines. It's one of the lines that I live by because, unfortunately, the easy part is usually having the heart of the social worker. The harder part is actually figuring out how to make it profitable, how to always find win-win scenarios where you can not only help people, but you can also make a good living and run a business doing that. Because it's very easy to find people that say they want help and need help, but they can't always pay you, or sometimes they don't want to pay you. But ultimately, the reason I'm saying that is because when I came into the business, I started under a commission, basically a commission only platform. I mean, we were charging financial planning fees, but those financial planning fees were also designed to essentially provide a financial plan that led people into commissioned products, that's where the majority of the money was made. And the industry has continued to shift away from commissions toward a fee-based only platform. Now, there's still a lot of that out there, but ultimately, to me, that heart of the social worker piece is really where, whenever you have anybody who is only selling product and that's all they sell and that's the only way they make their money, there's always a conflict of interest. It doesn't mean that that person's always doing the wrong thing. They might be a great person. They might be a great salesman. They may only be selling that product to the people that it's right for. The problem is that when you only have one product to sell, then that product becomes the right product for everybody. And it's never the
100%.
right product for everybody. The other big shift that I have seen is just the shift towards that registered investment advisory platforms. It's the shift away from working with the big broker dealers towards registered investment advisory platforms. There's a whole lot more podcasts and content and information out there that is helping people make that change and do things in a way that that they feel is best for them and their clients, instead of being pigeonholed into having to do things a certain way based on the way that large broker dealer wants you to do things.
Yeah, so the more autonomy by breaking away from the larger broker dealers is what I'm understanding, right?
Yeah. And now what you're seeing too, by the way, this is a bigger change that I haven't even experienced. I just know it's out there, is you now have all these independent registered investment advisory firms that are being bought up by venture capital. So venture capital is coming in. They don't do financial planning work, right? All they want to do is they see companies with a good cash flow and an income stream. They want to buy them up for a high multiple and package them up, but then say, hey, you've got to do things a certain way. And they start to take away some of that autonomy again.
Yeah, so it's like a cycle, right? It's like you go independent to break away and have the more autonomy, and then you kind of need that benefactor again, and then you're back in the same situation where you got to do things a certain way, and then it kind of takes away from the independent side of things. So it's
Yeah.
that is interesting, and that's something that I've had to learn about, right? The independent RIA space and the RIAs and the difference between working for a smaller place and a broker dealer. And it's interesting. There's a lot of moving parts that go into it. But what I really liked what you said is about having the right, if you have one product, it's the right product for everybody. And I always think about like the expression, like if you have one tool in your tool belt or you have a hammer in your tool belt, everything looks like a nail. So you want to kind of avoid having those situations where everything is just a nail, right? And the only thing you have is the hammer. Being able to have multiple products, multiple things to be able to help clients. And maybe in the independent space could be a great way to do that, to be away from kind of the specific things, jamming a square peg into a circle hole rather than, just finding the right hole for that peg, right? Making sure that every client is taken care of in the way that it needs to be taken care of.
Yeah. I mean, there's always a balancing act. So ironically, our firm's called the Balanced Wealth Group. And we named our firm the Balanced Wealth Group, not because of balancing an investment portfolio. It's because we believe that everything in life has a balance. And even with like talking about the RIA space versus like the broker dealer space, or even these larger, roll up RIAs, there's always a balance. And what I mean by that is everybody is different. The reality is many advisors, they need the structure, they need the organization, they need the systems and the processes that a large broker dealer or a roll up RIA will provide them. They need it. Like they're just not good at creating their own stuff and doing that on their own. But on the other side, there's a lot of people out there that they are very passionate about doing things the way that they do them. They're very good at creating systems and processes, and they can do that in a way where they can operate very well on their own. So it's a balancing act. And that's one of the things that you have to figure out is, anybody who's coming into this career, like you'll be coming into this career soon. I didn't even ask you, what grade are you in?
I'm a senior in college.
You told me that. Yeah, you're a senior. So like hopefully next year you're practicing. But the reality of it is you're going to learn a lot about yourself in the first few years you're doing it. You don't really know what you're necessarily good at and what you're not as it relates to not only being an advisor, but also potentially being a business owner.
Yeah.
And when you figure those things out, you're kind of going to figure out, like, is this the right place for me? I do remember going back to Ted Jenkins. One of the other things he said was, one of the things he was talking to this whole group, and he said, one of the things you're going to have to determine as you go through and you work here is this the right company for you? And I remember thinking to myself, Like there was no question in my mind that that was the right company for me. And why was that
Mhm.
though? It's because of my experience. It was because my grandfather had worked for that company. My dad had worked for that company. That didn't necessarily actually mean it was the right company for me. It took me years to determine whether or not it was the right company for me. And, so you're going to learn these things as you go and figure out what's right for you.
It's all a learning process, especially when it comes to career development, and career development never ends. And I think that kind of segues perfectly into my next question about professional development. How important has professional development been to your career when it comes to leveling up your game or just moving up to that next step?
I mean, I will say hands down, make sure well, let me start with this. Trying to remember his name. I'm drawing a blank right now, but he was a Boston Celtics coach. He coached the team that won the Big Four team, the Big Three team. Doc Rivers. Doc Rivers, I believe, is who said this, was that average players want to be left alone. Good players want to be coached, and great players want to be told the truth. Okay. To me, that is huge. So when we talk about like career development, professional development, to me, it's not just about professionally developing yourself and learning and getting the right continuing education and so on and so forth. It's also about having the right people that are leading you. Be coachable, be willing to learn, always be a student of the game. And so for me personally, I hired it was actually a life coach. It was weird how I fell into this. I was in a networking group. This woman was a life coach. I hired her. I think she was charging me like $200 a month back then. This was 20 years ago, to start doing coaching. And the truth is, I loved it. Ingrid Kazmarek was her name. And actually, I've tried to find her since, and I haven't been able to. So if by chance anybody knows Ingrid Kazmarek, put her in touch with me, please. Honestly, she could have passed on. I don't even know. But anyway, I went from working with her to eventually working with somebody in the financial planning field. So I hired a coach in the financial planning field. And ever since, I've always had one. And the hardest decision I ever made was when my son was born. So 7 years ago, was when I made the decision to go from paying a coach. At that time, I was paying $300 a month, so $3,600 a year, to interviewing three coaches that all wanted between $36,000 and $50,000 up front to start working with them, as well as then basically $3,000 a month after that. Okay. Between that and getting involved in some masterminds, so I'm assuming you know what masterminds are.
Mhm.
That's kind of becoming a big thing, is, basically finding other advisors in the industry that practice the way you practice, meeting with them on an ongoing basis. And by ongoing basis, even if it's just once or twice a year, it doesn't have to be every month or quarterly, whatever, but it's just kind of sharing things with them, but also working together to have accountability. But my point here is that I have always spent money on personal development, whether that be from conferences, learning new things, getting new designations, but also hiring somebody to coach you and hold you accountable to the things that you need to be doing to grow and get better at what you do. Sharpen your sword, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, coaching is so important, and your investment in yourself is something that not everybody does, right? To be able to put up that much money into investing into a coach, it's hard to like see that initial chunk leave your account and then paying that. I can imagine, right? But if you take a long term view on it, and you really believe that these educational opportunities are going to benefit you, then I think that it's worth it. I think education is like the number one thing that we could be doing as like a human being. Personal education, reading books, talking to people, learning from other people's mistakes. That's a big reason why I started this podcast, right? Like the conversation that me and you are having right now can be used as a guideline or a template in a way for another student to be able to interview a professional, just have a networking call, right? So I think that investing in your education is really important. And that's why I wanted to hear what your opinion was on it as well.
Yeah, well, you said something earlier that sparked this, but like ultimately it's faith. Like you said, like you're going to make an investment in education or an investment in a coach or a consultant. Like all you can have is faith that it's going to work. You're not going to
Yeah.
know right then and there that it's going to work. And that was not easy for me. I'm not actually a big spender. Like I'm actually, many people call me cheap. I don't like that term. I prefer financially responsible. But it's hard for me to spend money on things. Like there's still things like I'm right now struggling with, do I hire the plumber to come in and replace my sump pump that just went, or do I do it myself? Because I did do it myself like 10 years ago. But I'm pretty sure this time I'm going to hire somebody because I can absolutely afford it. And why? Why would I spend the time doing it where I'm probably going to mess it up anyway?
Yeah. I mean, it's I don't know if frugality is the right word, but I always grew up doing DIY and learning how to do everything myself between both of my parents, right? So I completely understand being like, especially the plumbing thing, like I'll just fix it myself. I don't need anybody to do it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's a leap of faith, like you said, to be able to, especially for a large sum of money, to be able to move forward with an education that you just don't necessarily know what the ROI is going to be. But I commend you for taking that leap of faith, and I hope that it has worked out in the way that you wanted to.
It has. If I didn't say that, by the way, that's part of what I was getting at.
Uh,
Like my income and my success in the practice has grown with leaps and bounds since I made that decision.
yeah, and hopefully that can be used as a guideline for other students listening to be like, hey, maybe that I should invest a little bit in my education, my career development. Which I know certainly I have. I've spent hundreds on books and audiobooks and some courses and whatnot. But I think education is so important, and I'm glad that you share that same principle.
Yeah.
Um,
Education is important, but also, there are times where you can overeducate and you can get too caught up in just educating yourself. You have to be able to take that and put it into practice and figure out a way to become profitable. That's the mind of the capitalist side. So
yeah,
just to be clear, anybody who's listening, don't fool yourself into thinking that going out and continuing to get new education and new degrees, that is not going to move you forward. In fact, one of the most successful advisors I know I don't know if he ever got his CFP. Like literally, this is a guy who still is making millions of dollars a year. And I know at least 15 years into the business, he did not have his CFP.
well,
He still may
yeah,
not today. I think he may have gotten it, but I'm not sure.
yeah, and that's a great question that I could ask is like about credentials. Like, what do you feel is some of the most important credentials for someone that's coming in the industry to look at right now?
I mean, certainly right now, the CFP is pretty important. And the nice thing is that most colleges, if you go to a college that does have a financial planning track, they are going to have a relationship with the CFP program that's going to allow you to basically test out of all of the modules. For me, when I came into the business, it took me 2.5 years to get my CFP because I was studying while I was practicing. So certainly getting your CFP is going to be important. I would also then, after that, one of the things that a lot of people are starting to do is specialize or niche in a specific space. If you are going to niche in a specific space, get a designation in that space so that you learn things that other people don't know. I've always kind of explained the CFP is like the trunk of a tree, right? That trunk of the tree goes up and it touches a whole lot of different branches that come off, but each one of those branches is a specialty. And off of those branches, there's all these little nuances that nobody knows about. So our niche is working with executives at publicly traded companies who have complicated benefits plans, including stock options, RSUs, equity compensation, so on and so forth. And the amount of stuff I learned a good amount about that stuff with my CFP, but it was only the baseline. It was basically the root, the trunk, right? All the little branches I've learned by doing other learning outside of that.
Yeah, and I really like that expression. Another one I'm probably going to steal from you: the trunk and then the branches with specialization. That's an incredible way to think about it, and I think it's really easy to visualize that in your head about the importance of obviously that trunk is the base knowledge what you have, and the CFP is so important for developing it, because if you just know what's on one of the branches and not the trunk, that's kind of hard to, right? But to further differentiate yourself is really where you got to learn the branches and all the little twigs that come off that and the different nuances. And the CFP, like you said, is involved with a lot of different schools, especially ones that have financial planning programs. And something that's a little bit harder for specifically like a student to get into right away, just from a time constraint standpoint and a currency standpoint, just an expensive designation, especially to get like in college when you're not being sponsored for it. But the good thing is that when you get into a firm, that there is an opportunity for most that you can get sponsored to take an exam like that, which I think is great.
Right.
Uh,
Just remember again what I said, that you getting a degree, getting your CFP, it doesn't make you money, and people don't start flocking to you because you have it. That does not happen.
100%.
I've never had anybody come to my door and say, I'd like to hire you because you're a CFP. Every client that is a client of our firm was a client that came either because I called them and asked them to come meet with me, or because they were referred to us by a friend who trusts us, not because we're a CFP. So it does
Trust.
help. It helps in giving people confidence in you, but it's not what is going to it's not what's going to make you successful in the eyes of the world.
Certainly, it's not the end all be all. Um, I wanted to ask a question about kind of the more rewarding parts of your career. Like, what do you feel has been the most rewarding and maybe the least rewarding parts about being in the financial planning industry?
It goes back to what we started with. It's the relationships. Um, in our firm and in the way I practice, and this really comes from my dad, is we cultivate a garden of trust, if you will, a garden of people come to us. We are always being helpful in everything that we do with clients. We're always listening for opportunities to help people, no matter what it is. And literally just last week, I got a call from a client who basically went down a path of trying to get me to help them together to make a decision that they were struggling about, not because of the money. This was something, it was $75 a month. Okay. But the decision ultimately came down to moral and religious beliefs that they each had that were a little bit different. And they were basically asking me what I thought I would do. Right. So that tells me that that client trusts me so much that they're willing to come to me about a family problem, not just a financial problem. It wasn't a financial problem at all. The $75 is nothing. And when clients are willing to do that, you have created this great relationship. And I will tell you, like going back to what I said about my dad, and that actually used to frustrate me when I was younger. There are a lot of people that'll laugh at that and they'll say you shouldn't get that close with your clients. I disagree. I believe that's what solidifies. You always have to do a good job of setting boundaries, making sure that clients know that they can't call you at 11 o'clock on a Saturday night, or really at Saturday at all for that matter. That you're not going to respond to messages over the weekend, things like that. But at the same time, it's cultivating a relationship of trust, and I mean that's that's it.
Yeah, trust is so important, and I'm really glad about how the attention that you've brought to it on this episode here, because relationships, trust, like that all comes in together. Communication, listening. It's, in my opinion, like the psychological portion of the career path is really what appeals to me so much, because I really love understanding the psychology behind a lot of things. And everything that you've said has kind of led me to the conclusion that psychology is so important with understanding these opportunities and building trust. And like you said, moving from having these people trust you so much to come to you with like a real family decision, rather than a money decision, I think is like, must be so rewarding that you've done your job so well that they're willing to take it outside of the realm that you're technically there for,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is really awesome.
Yeah, that's what I love the most. So
I'm super happy about that. And I want to ask one final question here before we wrap up.
yep.
Um, there's a lot of people, I hope, listening that are in different age groups, coming either from high school or in college, that are looking to get into this career. And what would your advice be for someone up and coming that is looking to get in here and just maybe doesn't have the connections, or just not the know-it-all right now, and looking to break into the industry?
Well, first and foremost, if you don't want to help people, don't get into this business. If it does not bring you passion to help people, I recommend you not get into the business. One of the first books I read when I started my career was See You at the Top by Zig Ziglar. And in that book, he says, if you help enough people get what they want out of life, you will get everything you want out of life. So make sure you have a desire to help. If all you want to do is benefit yourself, you can still be a good advisor, don't get me wrong, but I would go to investment banking. So first and foremost, know that you want to help people. Secondly, take the time to learn who you are and what is important to you. Don't ever de-emphasize that. Understand your values, what makes you tick, what it is that brings you joy. And if you don't know how to figure those things out, there are tools out there that will help you do that. One of those things is the values cards. So if you Google values cards, you'll find it. There's a book I read, another book near the beginning of my career, Financial Intelligence, is written by a guy named Doug Lennox, who was a very successful advisor, became a great leader at IDS and American Express and Ameriprise. In that book, he talks about using values cards to help you figure out what are your top values and or what are the top values of the people that you work with. And you want to make sure that those align. Because if they're not aligning, if your values don't align with the values of the people you're working with or working for, then you want to find another job.
100%.
And I would strongly encourage you to, as you're doing that and as you're interviewing and or working for a firm, ask the right questions. Ask the right questions. Or ask questions to really determine, do our values align? That's what's most important. How much assets under management a firm has is important. How they service their clients, that stuff's all important, but it's not nearly as important as your values and what is their why and what is your why. Why do you do what you do and why do they do what they do? And if those line up, that's what you want to do. And then the last thing I wrote down was just as you are going out there and looking for work and going back to what I said earlier about balancing out, like what are you good at with what are you not? You want to find a firm to work with that will provide you with good structure, but that also will give you freedom. And one of the things that I am, that I think that I'm very happy to be able to provide to our advisors is a platform that says, look, if you want to come here and you want to work with us, we don't view once you've started relationships with clients, we're very lenient in how if you decide 5 years from now that you don't want to work here any longer, we're going to work with you on figuring out how to transition yourself to a firm where you do want to work. And if you have clients you've created relationships with that you would like to maintain those relationships, we're going to work with you on figuring out how you can purchase those clients, how you can pay for the equity, depending on whether or not you brought them in or we cultivated them. But one of the things that irritates me the most about the industry is the non-competes out there and the things that basically say, look, like, we own these client relationships. They're ours and you can't take them. And while we do own those client relationships in some form or fashion, I'm always going to give our people the freedom and the flexibility to be able to do what they want to do and do it, and also do it based on how the client wants to do it. I want them to have that freedom. Doesn't mean they're not going to have to pay for it. It just means they're going to have that option. They're not going to have to be scared that we're going to, cause a problem. So find somebody that provides you with structure, but make sure you balance that out with the freedom that they provide you. Freedom to practice somewhat the way you want to practice, and also to be able to leave one day if you decide it's not the right fit for you.
I mean, there's so much wisdom in what you just said, right? And I really hope that everybody that was listening just wrote all that down. But to go back to what you started with, just wanting to help people at the end of the day, for me, is my number one driving force. And this is such a great career path to really help people, like you said a little bit earlier, get what they want out of life to the max that we can. And if you can do that and you want to do that, then I think this is a great opportunity for you. And then finding how you align with a firm based on your values is so important. I look at my values every day. I've done that values card exercise more than once,
Good
and
for you.
they've changed over time a little bit, but some have been pretty consistent. And that, understanding that will help you so much. Back to the decision making process of like, okay, what are my values? How can I is this decision aligned with my values? Is it benefiting one of those values? Is how I use them to make decisions. And there's just there's so much great things about this industry, and I'm really glad that you share that advice for these students coming up. And yeah, I can't thank you enough for that. Thank you, serious.
Well, thank you for sharing all the stuff you shared, Ryan. I mean, I have no doubt that you have a prominent future ahead of you. The fact that you're doing the stuff that you're doing already while you're in college, the fact that you're already doing values cards exercises, you're learning about yourself, you know who you are. That is so impactful. And I guess the last thing I would share, because you kind of prompted this, is I actually had a call. We had somebody from Ohio University reach out to me, and they said, "Hey, I just wanted to talk to somebody and just like ask questions about the business and stuff." And this young man starts talking to me about all these things that he's studying. I can't remember what he was studying. Let's call it engineering. It wasn't financial planning. And but he starts telling me about how he has been reading books on personal finance. He's read books by guys like Warren Buffett and Peter Lynch, and I can't remember who else. But he's done all this reading, and he's been learning about financial planning. He's been helping his friends make better financial decisions, and he's like telling me all this, and he's got all this passion. I'm like, I go, first of all, like, he asked me a question like, what do you think I should do or something? And I said, first and foremost, I think you need to change your major.
Yeah,
Because and I asked him, I said, do you do any of this stuff, all this stuff that you just talked to me you do with personal finance? Do you do any of that in quote unquote engineering, whatever it was? And he goes, no, not really. I just take my classes and blah, blah. I go, then you're in the wrong, you're going down the wrong path. Like, you clearly are passionate about helping people make good financial decisions. That's what you should be doing with your life.
100%. And it reminds me, like, I study here at Binghamton now, my senior year, but my first year of college, I went to Stony Brook University, a college on Long Island, 20 minutes from my house. I was studying chemistry. And I took a few classes and I was like, okay, I can help people like this. I thought I wanted to be a doctor. And then I took one personal finance class, and it completely reignited the spark that I had like through high school about learning about this industry and helping people make those financial decisions. And I was like, well, this is exactly where I need to go, because this is what excites me and was what makes me happy, and interested in the career. And I'm glad that you help push him in that path towards a career in this opportunity. That's something that he really seems passionate about. And there's a lot of people out there that just maybe are on the fence about moving into a career like engineering, or not that engineering is bad, but having a passion about something else and just kind of putting that to the side because you want to get a good job, or whatever your rationale is behind straying away from your passion. But if you work towards your passion and that's just something that you could do for a career, then you never really work. You really just kind of, obviously there's going to be some parts that you don't like, and there's going to be some parts that you love, but moving towards something that you're passionate about is one of the most underrated things that you can do from a life standpoint and from a happiness standpoint as well.
Yep. Yep.
Well, Matt, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate all the wisdom that you've bestowed on us today. I can't thank you enough. This has been great. And if you want to have the opportunity to kind of shout out your podcast or whatever else you feel would be beneficial to you guys.
Thank you. I will just, the only reason I'll shoot out my podcast is to say that if you have listeners that are going into the business and they decide that they want to take a niche in working with executives who have equity compensation from publicly traded companies, that is who our podcast is geared toward. But it's also geared towards people who are trying to find more balance in their life, primarily because when you start working with a bunch of executives, you find that these people are overworked and they are stressed out and they want more balance in their lives. So we talk both about some of the technical aspects of having stock options, the complicated employee benefits packages that they have, how to manage their income, estate planning, whatever it may be. But we also talk about how to find better balance in life. So the podcast is called The Financial Planning, oh my God, what is my podcast called? Financial Planning for Executives. You can find it on Apple or on Spotify. And the name of our firm is Balanced Wealth Group. We are not currently hiring. We've just hired 2 interns for next summer, but next year we will be hiring 2 more interns. So anybody who's interested in applying for that position can reach out to us. It's going up until about next summer. So
Awesome.
thank you for having me on, Ryan. I appreciate it, man.
I appreciate you coming on, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to get to know you a little bit here today and ask you some questions. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.